Hey, welcome back to the shop. This is the Q&A video. It's Monday. I'm going to do a little bit each evening and get through these questions and hopefully have this uploaded by Wednesday or Friday night. But let's just jump right into it. 703 Youngster, and this question he's asking, I can still see the cross hatching. It's very visible, but you can tell it's a U cylinder. Can I just hone it? He's talking about on a two-stroke. So I grabbed me a YZ250 cylinder here. Now, when we look up the exhaust port and we're looking at the cylinder, what we can see when we're looking up the exhaust port, this area, I don't know if you can see it on the camera back here, that's always going to look good for the most part. That's one of the areas of the cylinder that receives the least amount of wear. So we're always going to see cross hatching there for the most part, unless it's really trashed. So it's hard to go by looking up the exhaust port. You're going to have to wait until you take the cylinder off the bike and then take a good look at it, because like on this one right here, this cylinder that went bad on my bike, you can see it wait, where was it? It started to peel away. Yeah, right there. Can you see that on camera there? Yeah, right there. You can see the nickel plate is starting to peel away. But what we're looking for is where the cross hatching's worn perfectly smooth. So we can see the original cross hatching right here, the honing, and as it gets right into here, it starts to they start to fade away, and they're pretty much gone right here in this area. If we follow this area right there, well, that's where the peel happened. So for me, looking at the original cross hatching on a nickel plated cylinder, when I see the cross hatching wear away completely, I know that nickel plating is wearing thin, and that usually indicates to me that it's pretty much due for a replate. I mean, I might have risked it with this one. If it didn't already start peeling right here, I might have took the risk and tried another piston in it, and but it beat me to it. Right now, as far as rehoning it, let's say you take it apart and you see that it's nice and smooth in one spot. Should you rehone it? I'm going to say no. Matter of fact, I don't ever rehone a nickel plated cylinder after its original honing. Now, I know there's people out there that completely disagree with me on that. And I even heard one guy in the comment section on my cylinder video, which, by the way, down in the description, there'll be a link to my cylinder video where I discuss this deeper for you if you're more interested in that. But I linked to him a video because he mentioned that he's never heard of anyone not recommending not honing a cylinder when you're just replacing a piston in it. And so I gave him a link to a video of a guy that pretty much agrees with me. Actually, let me rephrase that. I agree with him. Slavin's Racing, nickel cylinder care. You can just YouTube that video right there, but I will put a link in the description down here. He says the same thing. Do not hone a cylinder, a nickel plated two-stroke cylinder or four-stroke cylinder after the original honing, because the nickel plating is already so thin. All you're doing is removing more material, and you need that material there, right? He says this is one of those situations where doing less is more, and I agree with him. Because once you've worn away that original cross hatching, you're not too far from just wearing away through the nickel plating itself. It is very, very, very thin. So I don't rehone them. I just throw a new cylinder, piston in there and run it. Now, if you're worried about glaze, I typically don't find glazing on two-stroke cylinders and stuff. But if you have some, you can always just use a Scotch-Brite pad, or you can use some very, very fine steel wool. This is 0000 steel wool, just very, very fine, and that'll wipe that stuff right off. But as far as honing them, no, I do not hone it after the original honing, either if it's a brand new cylinder right from the manufacturer, or if it's a replated cylinder, they hone them for you. When you have a cylinder replated from someone like Power Seal or US Chrome, it will be mailed back to you, honed, ready to go. Just throw your piston in it and you'll be good to go. Okay, on to the next one. Now, I'm real bad at reading some of these names, so sorry about that. I'm just going to call you 7177. How you doing? All right, he's asking, how many hours would you recommend for a KTM 500 EXCF? 90% trail ride and 10% road use. The manual says 100 hours for a complete rebuild. However, I read reports of people going 300 to 500 hours. That's a good one. I mean, obviously, we don't want to wait until something like this happens, but yeah, that thing's pretty tore. We'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, the manuals, you gotta have to take it with a grain of salt, right? Like I believe it's the YZ450. I'm not sure what year. One of the newer ones. The manual says to change the motor oil every like 25 or 30 hours, some ridiculous number. But they tell you to do the piston every 10 hours. If you follow the manual, you're gonna change your piston at 10 hours, and and just keep running the same motor oil until you hit 30 hours. You're not going to have any motor oil left in that motor at 30 hours. I believe some of the stuff in the manuals is there's a little bit of politics behind it. You know, like here in America, we have the EPA or whatever. Give you example, in the automobile world, a lot of manufacturers are telling you the automatic transmission fluid will last the life of the vehicle. Well, we mechanics know that's not true. And if you change your fluid at least every 100,000 miles or sooner, you're going to get longer life out of that transmission. But the reason they say that is because they're taxed less by the environmental people if they sell the vehicle as it will never need any more transmission fluid than what's in it on the day we sold it. Yeah, but you know, they know it's going to make it past warranty, right? So what I'm saying is you have to take what the manuals say with a grain of salt sometimes and use some common sense. The same goes for torque specs on these YZ two-strokes here. The bolt that goes right through here holds your linkage on down there. If you follow the torque specs for that, it's probably going to develop play at some point. You'll get a little bit of play in the rear end. You can chase it down to that bolt right there. If you put just a little bit more torque, about 10 or 15 pounds over the factory torque specs, it will cinch it down and that play will go away. So again, we have, you know, the manual's good to have. We need the manuals, and they're great to have, and I read them, and some of that information in there we have to have. But when it comes to things like intervals, rebuilding the motor, oil changes, torque specs, all that kind of stuff, we do have to apply some of our experience and common sense to that. That being said, to answer your question, well, 500cc, that's a pretty big motor, right? And, you know, it's the bigger the motor, typically, the longer life you get out of them before you have to do a rebuild. 90% trail ride and 10% road use, so you're you know, it's kind of has an easy life as long as you keep up with your oil changes and keep your air filter nice and clean. I can tell you on a 450, my experience is more with the race bikes personally. I just have to be honest. But as far as the 450 going around the track, and now we're talking about track use here, where we are pinning it out of every corner and just giving the bike hell, and it gets a lot of heat cycles. We do 15-minute motor, we shut them down, start them back up, get them hot again, then shut them down, they cool off. A lot of heat cycles. Hey, Beavis! And yeah, we have these chickens in here slipping in here. But yeah, we do a lot of heat cycles and stuff like that. We beat them up on the track. But that being said, for a vet rider or a slower rider on a 450, I suggest doing a top end rebuild every 100 hours. I suggest, even if the piston comes out looking brand new, well, it's still good to do it because the piston's been through a lot of heat cycles and stuff like that, and it gives you good. It's a good time to inspect the motor, make sure everything's still good, crank's holding up well, and everything like that. I suggest every 100 hours on a 450 for the slower guys and the vet guys. Now, if you're a really fast guy on a 450, I suggest every 60 hours. If you are literally an A rider or a high-level B rider and you're just giving that bike hell out of every corner, hitting the rev limit or stuff like that, every 60 hours. I have seen people take like a 2013 CRF 450, fast guy too, took it 200 hours, didn't touch the motor, didn't do a top end, a bottom, and everything was fine. But you never know, right? On the track, you never know if it's going to crack a piston and lock up the motor or break a rod and right on the face of a jump. You don't want that. And that's why we do these intervals a little bit sooner for a track bike. However, for something like this that you're riding primarily trails, and it's a big 500, you're mainly torquing it around. Honestly, I would, if it was my bike, I would run it 150 hours and do the top end. While I'm in there, I'm checking out the crank and stuff like that, and the timing chain. Maybe consider a timing chain at 150 hours. But I would definitely take it. I would have no problem taking this bike up to 150 hours before doing a top end under this type of usage. And then at 300 hours, you know, I'll take another 150 hours, and the bike will be a total of 300 hours. Then I might consider the crank. Might not. I don't know. I might just pull it apart, look at it, and if everything looks good, put a new piston in it. Look at the cylinder. If it's good, reuse it. If it's not, put a new cylinder or have it replated, and check out the crank. And maybe just do the full rebuild at 300 hours, you know, with a top end at 150 and a full rebuild crank, top end, everything like that at 300. Sounds reasonable to me. But what I'm basically saying is I think you can get a lot of usage out of this bike. I think 100 hours is for complete rebuild is overkill by a long shot. Alright, Wisconsin. What head bolt is the longer one? This is for the YZ250F. He's asking. This was a 2021. You know, we have 4-cylinder head bolts that hold the cylinder head down. And on some bikes, they're all the same length. Some bikes have a longer one, a shorter one. And if you pull them out, you didn't pay attention to which one went in what hole. Well, there are a few easy ways to figure this out. One way is go to Rocky Mountain Motorsport, Partzilla, whatever, and look at a park schematic. Right, so for this one, it has one bolt that's a different length than the other 3. So if I put the mouse over this bolt right here, it says there's 3. See the 3 right there? So that's 3. This one right over here, this is a single one. This is the oddball one that's at a different length. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow this line right here to see what it goes to the back right. So the rear right is going to be the one that has the oddball. And then another way to do it is just to take all 4 of them, or take the oddball one, but take all 4 of them and put them in the cylinder, in the holes that they're supposed to go into, and look to see how far it sticks out each one without threading it in. They should be all about close to equal. I've seen some bikes that one could be a little bit higher or lower, but you'll know if you put it in one, it sticks way up, or it sticks way, or it's way down. Well, it's not in the right hole. They should be all sticking out about equal before you bolt them down. That's another way to figure out which one goes into what hole. Alright, next one. Cameron Bickford. Would you be willing to do a head mod for me if I send you the solder pieces with my head? Oh, everyone loves my handy dandy handwork with these cylinder heads. I get them so good, I'm not going to kid you. This is for my YZ125, one of the heads that I did. I do them for the YZ250 as well. And if you're interested in doing one for yourself, down in the link, down in the description will be 2 links. Part 1, Part 2 for doing the cylinder head yourself at home. As for me doing it for somebody, well, unfortunately for me to do it for someone, I have to charge a lot because I don't have a lathe and all these special tools to do it. I do them by hand in the shop. If you watch that video, you'll see how I do it. It's very time consuming to do it like that at home. But, you know, it works for me because I only have to do maybe a couple of these a year. And it's allowed me throughout the years to fine-tune the art of getting them really good. In that video, I do pretty much give you the specs on how to do it for the YZ250. If you're interested for a YZ125 or anything of such, you can check my channel. I have videos on the YZ125 as well. I could do it for you, honestly, if you mail it to me, but the labor is going to be about $300 plus shipping both ways, and in my opinion, it's not worth it. If you can find someone that you can mail it to that has a machines to do it. I know Pro Circuit will do it for you, but I don't know how much they charge. RK Heads used to do it for $100. You would take the piece of solder, mail it to him, and he had it down. He had good specs, pretty much the same type of specs that I'm using. Did a really good job, but I've heard since then he's retired, doesn't do it anymore, which is a real bummer. But there's got to be someone else out there that doesn't just mill them, they actually get it right. And if you find someone to do it, at least be able to tell them the specs you want, right? If you want the same compression as stock, just the squish band tighter, and where you want the squish band set to. Not someone that says, oh, I know the magic, let me do it, because who knows, they might not have the magic, right? That being said, if you can't find anyone and you're willing to pay, you can mail it to me. I will do it. There are a few things I suggest if you mail it to me for me to do it. First thing I would suggest is I'm going to ask what kind of piston you have in it. I need to know that. I would prefer a Wiseco or a forged piston. Second thing is OEM cylinder base gasket. It's real important because once you get that squish band clearance set just right, you want to be able to buy the same gasket down the road and do a top end and not have the cylinder now sit a little taller or a little bit lower and change the squish band clearance. You got to be able to do top ends and not have the squish band clearance change any, because it's going to be set on the tighter side. So tolerances become tighter, things need to be more accurate. When you buy aftermarket cylinder base gaskets, Cometic, whatever, sometimes they just change the thickness out of nowhere, or whoever's making their gaskets might all of a sudden use a different sheet of paper for it or whatever. But when you buy the OEM gaskets, it's been the same for this bike since 2003. I can tell you that. They have not changed it. Same with the 125. But that being said, if you do find someone that can do it and get it to your specs, and it's a reasonable price, $150, you know, because they have a machine that knocks it out real quick, let me know so I can send other people that way when they ask. And if you can't and you're willing to pay for me to do it, I'll do it for you, man. Just let me know. Shoot me an email, upallnight91@hotmail.com, and I'll take care of you. Or you can go down the rabbit hole and just follow my video right here, YZ250 two-stroke head mod. There's part 1. I'll have a link in the description. And you can do it yourself at home. And any of you guys listening to this video, if you want to try it, it's not that hard. Just follow the video step by step. It's tedious. You want to make sure you have everything just right. What do they say? Measure twice and cut once. Water on fire. All right, WR450 2022. How long should I wait before I do a piston change? 90% woods, 10% dunes. It's kind of like what the answer I had just a few minutes ago on the KTM 500. But you're asking, can I get 300 hours? It's a little high. I wouldn't want to run it. Even if I was really putting around at 300 hours is kind of a lot. I might be okay pushing it to maybe 200 hours if I'm taking it easy. But I would prefer to get it in, you know, if I'm riding a bike fairly easy, about 150 hours. I would prefer to get one in. Doing a top end is good because it's not only just getting a fresh piston in there, but you're also going to be taking the time to check the valve clearance and look things over, checking your crank, make sure you don't have a rod bearing that's starting to get some play, or even a crank bearing starting to get a little play. It's considered an inspection as well. So I would say no more than 200 hours, but for me, I would suggest 150, you know, and you should be okay. By the way, if you're curious, this is a KX250F. This thing, look at this. Yeah. At least it didn't break. Sometimes when they lock up like that, they break the rod. It just slings around, tears up the cases. It didn't do that. It just left a whole bunch of everywhere. It's just nasty. But I'll have that thing going in like 2 days. Tomorrow I'll probably have the bottom end together. Maybe I'll have it running by tomorrow evening, or at least the next day. But that's Victor's bike, and it locked up on. But we'll take care of it. Oh, but check this out. As that lower rod bearing was starting to come apart and get some play, it allowed the piston to come up a little bit too high and just kiss the valves. Now, the valves appeared to still be good, but I'm going to go ahead and put some new intake valves in it anyway, just in case they got fatigued a little bit. I don't need these valves breaking on us, you know? So we're going to put some new intake valves in with a new piston, obviously, and a new crank. All Kawasaki parts, of course, except for the piston, I believe. I believe we went to YZ250 piston on that one, but yeah, it'll be good when it's done. Alright, it's Tuesday. Just finished up my work for today. You notice the bench is nice and clean. I actually got the KX250F done today. Check this out. Let's give her a kick. Yeah, got that done. Alright, so Seth is asking, will you make a video on the left side KTM crank bearing, how they use a roller bearing? Well, I'm not going to make a video just on that, but I'll do a little bit explaining on these. I mean, I don't know. I really don't know why they use these type of bearings right here, right? Honda, the CRF 450, like back in 2002 to, what was it, 2002 to 2016, I know they definitely used it. And maybe some of the new models, I can't quite remember off the top of my head. And they only use it on one side versus using these type of just your normal bearings right here. What I can say about these is they are stronger. They hardly ever fail, and they hardly ever go bad. Now, I will say they do inherently seem to always have some play for whatever reason. Like on the CRF 450s, it had a bearing like this on one side of the crank, like this is the crank, a bearing like this on one side, and a bearing like that on the other, and that side would always have a tiny little bit of up and down play. Maybe not always when it's brand new and you first put the bearing in, but as soon as you start it up and it breaks in, you're going to have a tiny bit of play, but it's fine. And it'll last forever, and it'll never get any more play than that. Where these are really tight right from get-go, but as they age, when they go bad, they can start developing some play, and that's usually a sign that it's time to go. Why they use them, I don't know. Sorry. Maybe someone can help out and comment and make a comment down there and answer your question why they use it. I don't know. But I will add that these do definitely make it easier to split the cases, because what they do is they have this sleeve right here, and it'll slide over the crank. And I mean, this one's not for this crank, so I can't get it on, but it'll slide all the way here. And when it's time to split the cases, that will just slide right out of the sleeve. Just slides right out like that. Makes it a lot easier to split the cases, where these bearings are actually for this crank, and you'll notice that I can't get them on there right now. They're interference fit, so I would have to heat this bearing up or freeze the crank or press it on to get it on there. It's not a very, very tight interference fit, but it's interference nonetheless. They have to do that so that there's no slippage between the inner race here and on the crank, because if there's any slippage and this starts rotating and moving around, it will just erode this part of the crank right here. Will just wear right into it and destroy the crank at some point. So that's why they do have to make them a little bit tight. And when you have a crank that has a bearing like this on both sides, when you split the cases, you have to fight through that friction a little bit to get the cases to split, where these split really easily. And that's really all I can tell you about them, honestly. Sorry. Alright, Romano Merchandisey, sorry, I'm probably saying that all wrong, apologize about that, but says, what brand of impact do you use? Well, I like that question. Have you guys seen my videos since the beginning of time? And I've had this earthquake impact right here. It's pneumatic one, you know, runs on air. And that's a really good impact. Matter of fact, down in the comment section, I'm sorry, down in the description, I'll have a link to where Av, the tool guy up in Canada, did a review on this and compared it to the Snap-on, and it's pretty much right up there with them at a fraction of the cost. You get this for about $100 or less at Harbor Freight. Now, I always have a spare one on hand. This is my spare one. I've used it, I think, like one day as a backup when I lost the little retaining clip on the end here, and I was waiting for a new one to come in, so I used it. But I always keep a brand new one on hand, because you never know when they're going to go out. That being said, I use them every day, all day, and I typically get a few years of use out of one before it actually does go out. And for the price, you can't beat it, right? And of course, then I got the big gun earthquake right here. This is just for the bigger stubborn stuff. I don't use it very often, but it's here if I need it. Now, no matter what brand impact you buy, if you get a air one, a pneumatic one, or if you get a battery powered one, you definitely want one that has selectable speeds. One of the things I like about this one is it has selectable strength, speeds, whatever you want to call it, 1, 2, and 3 for both forward and reverse. So because, you know, in motocross we do run into reverse threads from time to time, so it's nice to have that option. Nowadays a lot of people are using the battery powered ones. Like I have this Works one right here. It's a battery powered impact. The thing that I don't like about this one is it has a speed selection. You can see right down here. There's 2 and there's 3, or strength, whatever you want to call it, for forward. But when you put it reverse, there is no it's always max in reverse. Now that would be a pain in the butt if I was working on a bike that had reverse thread stuff. But at least it has 3 speeds, and I don't use this very often as well. I use it often. You see me use it a lot in my videos, but for me, I like the electric ones, but they will not replace the pneumatic one. So if you're only buying one and you have a compressor at your house, it doesn't have to be a big compressor, as long as it has a tank and has good flow, I highly suggest getting a pneumatic one, and one with 3 speeds, both forward and reverse. And a smaller one like this, you know, I mean, I like the 3/8, I'm sorry, the 1/2 inch on the end, because I can always reduce it to what I need it to be. I can reduce it all the way down to 1/4 drive if needed. But the reason I like the pneumatic over the battery powered ones in the shop is feel. I can feel it better. These things are a little bit too rapid sometimes, and I just can't really judge how much torque I'm putting down with these. It's really hard to get familiar with it to the point that I can guess, like, oh, this bolt takes 60 foot-pounds of torque. I know about how much I can use this impact. I know what setting to put it at and how long to hit it to get it to right about that, just because I'm familiar with my tool. It's hard to do that with the electric ones. The hammers on them are too rapid. They're more of a real quick, where these are more like, and the quick hammer just makes it really hard to feel that. Another issue I have with the electric ones is they have a tendency to want to climb the socket up off the nut while it's hammering, while it's vibrating. It wants to climb up off of it, so you have to press it down to kind of hold it on. The pneumatic ones don't seem to have that issue. What I mainly use this one for in the shop is I keep it on the low setting, and I use it to do all the twisting work for me. So when I'm putting in 8mm case bolts in, or clutch cover bolts or whatever, I can use this to do all the twisting for us. It's on the setting number 1, so it's not going to, even at setting number 1, it probably won't even strip out a 8mm bolt unless I really sat there and hammered on it for a long time. But I'll take it all the way down to the bottom so I hear it click once or twice, stop, and then I'll finish tightening up by hand. So that's mainly what I use this for in the shop. And I also have one of these around in case I know I'm going to be doing some work at the track. I'm not going to bring a whole air compressor to the track with me. I'm just going to have to make this work at the track. Otherwise, I find these are far better to use for the most part, because I can feel how much torque I'm putting down. It's easy to get familiar with them and to trust them. And they don't try to climb up off the nut. So these are the impacts I'm currently using right now. This works. My brother turned me on to this one, and he actually, I believe he bought me, no, I bought it. He lent me one, and then he had me buy one pretty much. But it's good. It's pretty much does the same thing like the DeWalt's would do. I will say on my next impact, I'll get another Works one if I still have a lot of batteries good to go, whatever, or I might get a DeWalt or a Milwaukee one. But any of the name brand ones are good. The main thing you want is to have speeds, at least 3 speeds. That's pretty important, so you can control how much torque you're putting down. And again, it's nice to have one that has 3 speeds, both forward and backwards, which this one does not have, unfortunately. Ken, it's an outrage. Yeah, we're still trying to figure out this whole flat earth thing, round earth. And boy, even in the comment section, it's yeah, who can prove it, really? I mean, yeah, show me a picture, whatever, but really, can you prove it? I don't know. We're still trying to figure it out. R. Steven. All right, he's about to do a top end on a YZ250F with 70 hours. Amazingly, he's never had to adjust the valves, but that doesn't surprise me, but I'll explain that in a minute. They're always in spec. Do you take the valves apart to clean the head, or do you clean most of the carbon buildup without taking them apart? What do you recommend for cleaning the head? I don't expect much carbon and would prefer not having to take them apart. All right, got this KTM head here. As far as, I'll start with the valve adjustment thing. I have gotten close to 200 hours on my own bikes without ever having to make a single valve adjustment on titanium valves. The key is not letting dirt get in there. The titanium valves have a very hard coating on them, and as long as you don't let any dirt get in there, the coating sticks around and the valves just never move. Because when a valve needs adjustment, it's a couple things that can cause that to happen. One thing is you've already worn through you're starting to wear through the little coating that they have on the valve, and the valve is now sitting deeper up in the head, which is tightening up the clearance. And then another thing that causes it is just wear on the cam. Not so much the cams typically don't wear much unless something goes south, but the valve shims can actually start to wear into the top of the valve, and the valve tip here can start wearing a little bit too. As well as just, like these bikes, if they have a rock arm, you might get a little bit of wear, or with the ones that have the valve buckets, the cam buckets, they can get a little wear where they press against the valve shim. The idea in the perfect world is as you get a little bit of wear in here and it starts to sit a little bit more up into the head, the components up here, the valve shim, stuff like that, will also wear and take up that extra little bit of tightness, and it all kind of equals out. And as long as that coating's still there and it's all equaling out, it's all good. Just keep running it. I like the titanium valves myself, and there's a question about valves coming up here shortly, so I'll talk about that a little bit more later in this video. But I like them myself, as long as you just keep the dirt out of them. You keep the dirt out of these, and you'll never have to make an adjustment. If you do, it's very, very minor, and it's maybe just one of the valves, and it's very minor if you do. Just keep the dirt out. Make sure your air filter is good and clean. Make sure it always it always fits snug in the air box, and there's no air crack leaks or anything like that. I don't use grease on the air filter around the lip. I don't think it's necessary. I just oil the whole filter, even the lip. I oil the whole filter and put it on there. As long as it fits tight in there and there's no air gaps, no grease is needed. Grease is really to cover up the air gaps if you have one that's not sealing properly. Otherwise, there's no sense in using grease. It just makes a mess. And like I said, I've gotten close to 200 hours out of a set of valves on a YZ450. No problem at all. As far as cleaning, they can get carbon built up on top of the valves. I just pulled this one out of that KX250 right there. You can see it's got a little bit of buildup, but I've seen them get a lot worse than this. If you feel like you really need to clean them, which I don't think you really necessarily have to, because however much carbon you have on there, it's just going to kind of come back on its own. As long as you run, good clean feel, and run the bike, run it through its paces, get it fully up to temperature and stuff like that. It's gonna burn off most of that stuff on its own for the most part. But if you really feel like you need to clean them, you pull them out, put them on a drill like this, and you use some really fine 0000 steel wool. And that will clean the carbon right up in no time flat. And that's, if you're looking to clean them, that's how I would do it. But like I said, it's not really necessary. You can just leave them in there. As far as cleaning the carbon out of the combustion chamber area, you can do it while the valves are still in place. Again, the same thing, steel wool, the 0000, the finest steel wool, and you just sit here and, I would put some WD-40 on it to help it out a little bit. But if you really feel like you need to clean it, that's the best way to do it. Me personally, that little bit, I'm not worried about. I just clean up around here for the head gasket to seal. That little bit of carbon there, I just leave it there. It's not going to hurt anything. Now, if you do go as far as pulling out all the valves to clean, like the exhaust port, you can see it gets, carbon buildup in there and stuff. If you're going to go that far, it wouldn't hurt to polish the exhaust port. You don't want to port it. You can, but I'm just saying you don't have to. You don't have to port it or anything. Just polish it and get it nice and smooth, and that'll keep carbon from being able to hang on to it. So it kind of gives it nothing to grip onto, so the port will stay cleaner. Next time you might not have to worry about taking the valves out and cleaning it. You might be able to just spray some brake cleaner in there or whatever and come out clean. The intake ports, they kind of stay clean on their own. The gasoline is always keeping that nice and clean, so there's usually nothing to worry about on that end. Will Powered. How to replace a rebound needle in the rear shock of a Honda CRF 450R 2018. Also, your thoughts on the Stark Varg. I've replaced rebound needles before on certain bikes, and I don't like doing it myself. You have to take, on most of the bikes, I'm not familiar, I don't have a CRF 450 shock here right now to look at and see how that one's put together to give you instructions, because they're all a little bit different. But most of them, you have to take the bottom clevis or whatever off the bottom of the shock and get access from all that area, obviously. And I don't like doing that unless I really have to. You have to make sure, on some bikes you have to make sure you measure how long the whole shaft is with the clevis. Make sure you put it back together at the same and everything. And I'm not a suspension guy, right? So I do suspension work, but when it comes to stuff like that, I kind of just leave that up to the guys that's all they do is suspension. If I had a bike that the bottom rebound adjuster needed to be replaced, I would probably just go on eBay, look for a good used shock, and either use that whole shock, clean, rebuild it, service it, and use that whole shock, or take that shock apart and take just the shaft out of it with the bottom clevis on it and the rebound adjuster. Take that out, take the shim stack and the piston off of it, set it aside, and put my bike's stuff on that and put it on the bike. Basically, I would probably just replace the whole bottom shaft with the rebound adjuster and stuff. If it was my bike, that's probably what I would do. And to answer the second part of the question here, what are my thoughts of the Stark Varg? It's an interesting bike. I test rode only one, but I have test ridden one, and it was set in the 60 horsepower setting. I was actually very impressed with the chassis, the frame, and the suspension. They have KYB components on it and stuff like that. It just felt like a very good, well-planted, modern bike. Didn't feel quirky or weird. Right away, as far as the suspension and the chassis, I was in tune with it right away. The motor, on the other hand, is weird to me. I know a lot of people talk about how fast they are and just unlimited horsepower. Now keep in mind, I only had it at 60 horsepower setting, not at the 80. but I thought I'd put it to 60 horsepower because that's more comparable to a 450 and maybe even more comparable to a modified 250 two-stroke. So I told him, set it to 60 horsepower for me. He had it at a full battery. What I found that was weird was it gives you a lot of power. Well, let me explain like this. Have you ever ridden a golf cart or some of these electric scooters where you get a lot of torque and horsepower at the lower speeds, but as the speeds start climbing, it starts tapering down the power. It starts like pulling some of the power out. The torque seems to be more at lower speeds. That's what I felt in the Stark Varg. In your first to third gear speeds, the bike just ripped. It ripped a little bit too much, and I'll talk about that too in a second. But then as I got into fourth gear speeds and fifth gear speeds, it actually tapered off. I was riding this bike that day, and there was an uphill section at Motor Bros in Okeechobee, and I swore this pulled harder going up that hill in fourth gear than that Stark Varg did. Now the Stark Varg started out really fast and hard down at the bottom of the hill and the lower speed coming out of the corner in your second and third gear speeds, but when I clicked up to fourth gear on this one, it kind of peels my eyes back as I'm climbing up that hill right up towards the top, where the Varg, the electric bike, just kind of started tapering off and kind of easing in. So I thought that was a little weird. They peel out like crazy. You know, you hear a lot of times people say the advantage of the four-stroke is the power is pulsy, so it kind of, it's chuggy, right? And that allows them to grab the ground and grip more. And two-strokes, they claim that they're too smooth and it causes them to peel out more. The electric is worse at peeling out than two-stroke or four-stroke. It's a lot of power at lower speeds, and every time you twist it, it just peels out. So maybe you get used to it. Another thing I thought was kind of weird too is we have a tendency to kind of gauge our speed on what gear we're in, and also we can control our power by what gear we're in. So, and we do it subconsciously, we don't even think about it. But like, you know, give you an example, you're going towards the jump, and let's say you're on this bike right here, I'm going towards the jump in third gear up at the top end, and it's just too lively on the throttle in third gear up at the top end. I want to smoothen it out so I can kind of hit this jump really nice and smooth and have better throttle control. So I upshift the fourth right before the jump, gets it down more in the mid where there's less of that peak horsepower, and the throttle's now a little bit softer, and I can get over the jump. The electric bikes, there are no gears, so you really can't shift gears to look for a different type of power. You're always kind of stuck at that same type of power. So, but you know, it's technology, and I'm quite sure in time, if they keep working on them, they're gonna fill in all these gaps and make them pretty good. Do I think they'll ever replace gasoline? No, I don't. You know, this is a hobby. It's not like in the automobile world where the government can tell you what you're supposed to ride. Well, maybe in California, I don't know, but in the rest of America and the world, this is a hobby, and I think most people kind of still prefer the gasoline. Yeah, you do have the electric people, but I've noticed the people that own the electric bikes, they still have a gasoline bike. Like, they didn't just sell their gasoline bike. The electric is almost like a novelty or a addition to their collection. So that's where I'm at on that. Again, I'm really impressed with the chassis and suspension, though. If I have to say the positive of it, they got that right for sure. All right, Joel's asking, who makes the best aftermarket cranks and pistons? Another great video. Well, obviously, you know, you can get a hold of Pro Circuit or VHM or whatever, and they have some very high-end cranks with titanium rods and stuff like that. I'm going to leave that out of the equation here. I'm just going to talk about the normal consumer stuff for the most part, from hot rods, Wiseco cranks to OEM. Me personally, I always prefer an OEM crank. Just the fit and finish is usually better. Everything about it's usually better. They usually have, in my opinion, a better longer lasting rod bearing and all that kind of stuff, and I just prefer a stock crank myself. I saved the Wiseco cranks and the hot rod cranks for the older bikes when you can't buy the crank from the manufacturer anymore. You know, some of these older bikes, like let's say a 2003 RM 125, you probably can't go to Suzuki and buy a crank for that anymore. So you'd be stuck either having your crank rebuilt using like a Pro X rod and bearing or whatever, or using a hot rod or a Wiseco crank. And between the two of them, they're about equal to me, between the Wiseco and the hot rods. Just whichever one you can get your hands on that will, and the price is right, you know. Otherwise, if you can get your hands on an OEM crank, that is the way to go in my opinion. As far as pistons are concerned, I really like the Wiseco pistons when it comes to 2-strokes. I use them in 4-strokes as well, but I typically lean more towards the OEM pistons on the 2-strokes. I mean the 4-strokes, especially for like your YZ450, your CRF450. A lot of them, they use that black coated wrist pin in here, and that won't work with the Wiseco piston. So I prefer to use OEM pistons when it comes to a lot of your modern 4-strokes, except for maybe the KTM variants, the Austria bikes, because their pistons are ridiculously expensive. You know, $350 to $450 for a piston, that where you can just go and get a Wiseco for $150 to $200. So yeah, I like the Wiseco pistons. They're made here in America too. That's always nice. I try to stay away from the Pro X pistons as much as I can. Not that they're bad pistons, they're not, but they're I don't know what you say. I've opened a box for Pro X pistons, and the piston is right, but the rings are totally wrong. They're like for a different bike altogether. It's just weird stuff like that. Or you open it up and it's missing the wrist pin out of nowhere. You know, it's just, oh, come on now. You know, I don't have them issues with the Wiseco. Every time I open the box, everything's in there. The correct piston rings for the piston are in there and everything like that. I avoid Pro X. If I'm going to go Pro X, I'm just going to go OEM, honestly. Vortex is good. They have some forged pistons for the 2-strokes, or racer pistons. The race pistons are forged, and for the 2-strokes, I always suggest a forged piston. The cast pistons will typically, they can break on the faster guys, or if you run them too long, and anytime you break a piston, it's not good. It's going to break other things. The forged pistons, you'll wear them out before you break them. They take a lot of abuse. They don't just snap like the cast pistons do. So when it comes to 2-strokes, I definitely stick with the forged pistons as much as I can. With the 4-strokes, like I said, typically the OEM, but if I am going to venture away from OEM, I'll usually just reach for a Wiseco, like what you see on this KX250F crank right here. Okay, I believe it's pronounced Jarb. Sorry if I'm getting that wrong. He says, with your experience, what brands do you find are the most reliable and cost effective? Best gasket brand, piston brand, etc. Also, what brands to stay away from? We definitely want to avoid the Chinese pistons, like these Namera brands or the no-name brands. Definitely avoid the Chinese stuff. When it comes to gaskets, I like to stick with the OEM gaskets as much as I can. Like this is for that KX250F. This is a steel shim gasket with rubber on both sides. This is a really good gasket. It seals really good. If we would have bought a Cometic brand gasket kit or some other brand, it would have been a paper gasket. I've seen paper gaskets sometimes just slip out. Some of your cheaper gaskets like that just slip out after a while or kind of come apart. I like to stick with the OEM gaskets, especially on the 4-strokes with the head gaskets. It's happened a few times where I've put bikes together and used aftermarket gaskets, and the head gasket just didn't seal. It had a little seepage coming externally or internally or whatever the case is. Pull it apart, put an OEM gasket in it, put it back together, and it was good. So I've kind of learned just to stick with the OEM gaskets, honestly. As far as pistons, well, you know I like the Wiseco pistons, like I just mentioned. This is actually a Racer Elite piston for the YZ250 2-stroke. These are beautiful pistons. It's a forged piston, just beautiful. When it comes to the 2-strokes, I prefer the Wiseco forged piston myself. The price is right. They're really tough. They're just really good pistons. I would say Wasner's another good forged piston for the 2-strokes. And like I said, for the last question, when it comes to the 4-strokes, I typically will shoot for an OEM piston. Just the fit and finish is typically better, unless it's something like like some of your KTM variants. Their pistons are just ridiculously priced, and I just can't justify paying $400 for a piston when I can just get a Wiseco for $150 to $200. So that's pretty much where I'm. But like if it was a YZ450, totally OEM. CRF450, OEM. RMZ450, OEM. Even the KXs, OEM. When it comes to the 4-strokes, they're really good. 2 strokes, I always get a forged piston in there, and I get rid of the cast piston, which means pretty much every 2 stroke out there, they come stock with a cast. I get them out. I don't even ride the bike one time. I yank them out, put a forged in there because I don't want it breaking on me. And that's where I'm at with the pistons. SPHL1, I believe that is. Supercross is here. Who is your favorite rider? Who do you predict to win the 250 and 450s? Your thoughts on Deegan moving up to the 450 class? Well, I gotta admit, I was rooting for Tomac, and then he got injured. Mainly because he's the old dog. I like to see the old dog, you know, kind of go out on top, especially after Jet was talking that trash about him and stuff, and calling him the old dog. Well, I wanted to see that old dog beat Jet, and then Tomac got injured, then Jet got injured, and now we're stuck with Webb, Roczen, and Sexton. I'm rooting for Sexton, actually, currently, right now. It looks like they all 3 of them kind of have a chance to win this thing in the 450 class. I really don't want Webb to win it because I know when he wins a championship, it's usually because he was just taking the scraps. You know, he's kind of like Dungey. He's always right there, second place or whatever. He's not going to fight for the win too hard. He'll take a second and just keep collecting the points until he gets a championship. I like to see someone hang it out and just really fight hard for that first place to get that win, to get that championship, and that's what I think Sexton will do for us. Or Roczen. It'd be awesome to see Roczen win a championship. So I'm kind of rooting for them too for the most part. Nothing against Webb. I like Webb a lot. I just, you know, when it comes to their riding, I would rather see Sexton or Roczen get it. As far as the 250F class, I really like Bamir, and I'm rooting for Bamir. I think Deegan's going to take it in the end just by the way he's been riding in the last race or two. And over here on the East Coast, RJ Hampshire, because he's from Dade City, and you know I'm over here not far from Dade City, and I ride the track, so I'm always rooting for him. But dang it, man, he keeps like going down, and stupid stuff happens, and yeah. Cole Davis has been very impressive, I will say that. And on the East Coast, I'm kind of rooting for Kitchen over here on the East Coast. Mainly, I got to be honest with you, just because he's on the Pro Circuit team, and I'm hoping the Pro Circuit, I mean, Anstey's on the Pro Circuit team too, but I kind of like Kitchen a little bit more, and so I'm kind of rooting for him on the East Coast. I'll be at Daytona this Saturday, by the way. It's going to be pretty cool. Factory 928 AC, what's going on, man? He's asking, what is the worst job that you ever done or come through the shed that's stuck in the back of your mind you want to warn others of the same bike? And is there anything the shed shop needs that we as viewers and subscribers can send you? Yeah, good question. Well, it's actually not a dirt bike. It's a quad, and it's the 660 Raptor. That thing's just a nightmare. I've worked on a ton of them. You fix one thing, something else goes. You fix that, something else goes. But the worst part about them is they have a oil pump gear inside the motor for the oil pump. The gear is made out of plastic, and it's known to break for no reason. It gets darker in color with age, and it gets brittle and just comes apart. And the owner doesn't even know when it comes apart. It's plastic, so it's not going to rattle around inside the motor. It's just going to chew up the little plastic pieces, and they just keep riding with no oil pressure until it trashes the whole motor. From the crank to the cylinder head, it just destroys the motor when that thing breaks. My suggestion is if you have one of them, pull off the right side clutch cover and check your oil pump gear. If it's nice and bright yellow looking, let me see if I can find a picture. Well, it looks like this right here. You see how it's nice and bright? When they start getting dark in color, you know it's about to break. Now, interesting enough, when I went to go search for this, it looks like they're starting to sell some metal ones, or maybe they've sold them for a while now. I just have never noticed it. But they sell some metal ones to get rid of that plastic one. If you own one of these and you ride it, maybe just get rid of that plastic one, go to metal. Or maybe just replace the plastic. It might be metal for a reason. You know, they might make them out of plastic for a reason. To keep some harmonics off of the actual veins inside the pump. Just a thought that I had as I'm sitting here talking about this. But whatever the case is, get in there, check yours. If it's dark looking, if it doesn't look bright and fresh like that one, get it out of there before you just destroy the whole motor. As far as dirt bikes, I really don't have any particular make or model that kind of jumps out at me as just being a pain in the butt or just giving me a hell of a time. I'll say generally, the KTM variants require more time to do the repairs or to diagnose. You're more likely to run into some weird stuff on them. Typically, I charge a slightly higher labor to do jobs on like your KTM variants, like rebuilds and stuff like that, because some of the weird stuff that you run into on them. But it's not too bad. It's just they're not quite as cut and dry as your Japanese bikes, but otherwise they're all pretty good when it comes to the two-wheel bikes. Answer the second part of the question: is there anything the shop shed needs that we viewers and subscribers can send you? You can send me a link to where to buy stickers, decals. I'm looking for Up All Night 91. Just a sticker about that size, but Up All Night 91 that I can give to my customers, send to viewers, subscribers, that kind of stuff. And I'm looking for something that's like a motocross graphic grade decal, not some of these cheaper ones like this Pivot Works right here, the Tusk, but more of your motocross grade. I've been meaning to take my time to look for someone that can print them up at a reasonable price and mail me a whole bunch of them, but I just haven't had the time to look into that. But if anyone knows a decal vendor or whatever, let me know, because that's really my next step. I need some decals. I have customers always asking for them, and I just never have any. TN Deer. I'm imagining that's Tennessee Deer. I'm glad you got your bike straightened out. He this message right here, you did a top end and the bike was bogging and stuff like that. He found you forgot a paper towel in the exhaust port or exhaust pipe or whatever, and went up into the stinger area right here and clogged it, and that's what was causing the bog. So glad you got that straightened out. Whew. Yeah. Ben Simmons. Sensei, my one question is, can you tell me everything, everything you know about the Beast YZ250? Seriously. I can, but it'll probably take the whole freaking video. That being said, if you go through all my YZ250 videos, I've pretty much covered almost everything I generally kind of know about. There's a few things kind of keep to myself as of right now, kind of squaring away. Want to make sure it's solid before I put it out there. But for the most part, I've already put everything out there. Now, that being said, since we're on the topic of the YZ250, if I could change anything on the bike, it needs a updated frame. The frame is outdated. You feel that when you ride some of the newer 4-strokes and stuff like that. The Flex they're great bikes. I love mine. As you know, I love mine. But that's one area, they updated the suspension. That's great. They updated the bodywork. That's great. The motor, they haven't really updated it much except for a different CDI on the 2022 and up. And the, sucking in its air from back here. So that does create more top end. And I think the different CDI also helps cure some of the pinging that they used to do down on the bottom. They're probably using a little bit of less ignition timing down there with that one. Maybe one day I'll swap CDIs with my other one and see what happens. But the motor really doesn't need a lot of work. They can keep the motor just the way it is. If anything, Yamaha, maybe fine-tune the gear ratios inside the transmission a little bit, because second gear seems to be a little bit low versus third gear. It's kind of a gap between second and third gear. So when you're trying to gear the bike perfectly, you're either going to favor second gear or third gear when you're focusing on the rear end gears that you're choosing. So because of that, I typically just stick with stock, the 50 tooth on the bike, and that just kind of works. But yeah. Multi-Trash 100. How do you compare material quality between Austrian bikes and Japanese bikes? Also, Pro X piston quality versus other expensive aftermarket piston quality. Well, like I mentioned a minute ago, I'm not too big of a fan of the Pro X pistons. If I'm going to buy a Pro X piston, I'm probably just going to get a OEM piston. Mainly because their quality control is a little bit poor in my opinion. Finding the wrong piston rings in the box and that kind of weird stuff. Sometimes even the wrong piston in the box, and I'm not even kidding you. So for that, yeah. I like the Wiseco pistons. You can't beat them for the price. They're forged. They're made in America, so they're not a Chinese piston. I don't know what country you're in. Maybe that matters to you or not. But, I do like, I live in America, so it's nice to buy a American-made piston. They've been around for a long time, and they continue to keep improving things. And you think I'm sponsored by them, but I'm not. I'm not sponsored by anyone. But I like the Wiseco piston. Can't beat them for the price. As far as material quality between the Japanese bikes and Austrian bikes, well, I do believe the Japanese bikes have the ability to handle the test of time better than the Austrian bikes do. As the bikes become older, they hang in there a little bit better. It's little things like the Austrian bikes will sometimes use like what I call wood screws to hold your radiator shrouds onto the tank, you know, instead of having metal. Now, I understand the metal inserts that they put in these can be a problem too. They can get stuck and all of a sudden strip out into plastic, but as long as you take care of them, it does a pretty good job. But also the frames, the KTM frames are definitely on the weak side. Versus like the older Japanese bikes back when we were running the chromoly steel frames of like the 2003 or 4 YZ250 and bikes like that. I believe them steel frames were kind of a better steel frame. They seem to last longer and hold up better, where the KTM frames kind of get a little flexy with age. So that's where the KTMs are great bikes. My issue with them is I don't think they're a great second or third owner bike. I think they're great for the first owner. Where the Japanese bikes, it's more about just how the bike's been treated and how it's been maintained. They kind of hold up a little bit better throughout the years. But that's just my opinion. And just so you know, I have never owned a KTM variant bike myself. I've worked on a ton of them, rode a ton of them. I haven't owned one, so take that for what it's worth. Jim G, 1964. Is that your birth year? He says, thanks man, from Canada. Use your video to service my rear shock when changing the oil. If I see small metal flakes in the oil, does it mean it definitely needs a rebuild after servicing? Return to its full stroke on its own with no weird noises. Also, if you are bottoming out your suspension on flat landings, would you adjust the low or high speed compression? Thanks. Oh yeah, to prove the earth is round, just start heading west and keep going for a few weeks and you'll end up where you started. Well, whew. Yeah, that would be a long trip. Damn dirty shock. This is a dirty one. I only bought it for the spring. Nice titanium spring. All right. I believe if you followed one of my videos on servicing your shock and you open the shock up from the compression adjuster right here, sometimes you will see a little bit of flakage with the forehead light on it like that or whatever. If you shut the light off, you might not see it at all. But with the light on, you might see a little bit floating in the oil. And where that comes from is the coating that's on the shock when you unscrewed this out. It's just kind of peeling that coating off when you put it in. You know, when you pull it out or put it in, it's just kind of peeling that off. It doesn't mean it's all the way in the shock body. It's usually, if that's all you're seeing, you're generally okay. That's not going to hurt anything. What I've done in the past to get that out of there is as I'm filling the shock up and I'm bleeding the shock, if I start seeing some of that right here, what I'll do is I'll just pour some fluid and let it overflow, and it will literally overflow that stuff out. I'll just keep pouring some extra fluid on top and letting it overflow until all that stuff's out of there, and I've considered that good enough. No issues. Now, if you're seeing more than that, definitely take the shock apart from the bottom, dig in, and see what's going on. And then you want to dig deep. Otherwise, if it's just about the same color as this stuff right here, and it's just right in this area, and you really only can see it with the light, if you shut off the light, it kind of just disappears. Yeah, just overflow it a little bit until that stuff comes out, and you'll be fine. Now, as far as bottoming out on hard flat landings, assuming you're not looking to dig deep and start changing things like springs or anything like, or valving or anything, you're just looking to make a change right at the track, or your bike's pretty close, you're just looking to address that. High speed compression is going to be your best friend, as well as sag. You can raise the rear end up a little bit, which would be less sag. You can raise the rear end up just a little. Doesn't take much either. If you take that spanner, whatever you want to call it in here, and just turn it just about that much tighter. I'm not even kidding you. That much tighter. Take it for a ride. That might be enough. And maybe if that's not enough, but it's starting to do better and it hasn't upset the handling, because as you lift the rear end of the bike, it's going to change the geometry. It's going to make it turn a little sharper. Could make the front end feel a little bit unstable if you go too far as it sharpens the steering. But if your rear end's riding too low and you don't have enough spring on that rear end, that by tightening that up a little bit, you'll get a little more spring on that rear end, and that will help you with your landings, as well as high speed compression. The high speed is the 17 millimeter right here for the Japanese, for most of your Japanese bikes. Some of your KX uses a 14 millimeter, whatever. But yeah, it's usually the outer hex one. The center one, that's your low speed. That really doesn't control bottoming so much. It more controls just the action of the rear. It's more for like it'll help get rid of these type when you're riding and your rear end just starts doing this wallow. It can help tame that down, kind of settles the rear end down. That's the best way to describe it. And the high speed is more for your hard hit. So the two things you'll want to focus on if you don't want to change springs or revalve would be put some more tension on the spring or crank the high speed in just a little bit at a time. Both of them, just a little at a time. Like, you know, this past week, you'll see I have one mark right here, and I don't know if the camera can get it. And there's no one right. Basically, okay, yeah. Let me see the 2 dots right here. I had them 2 dots lined up, and I wanted a little more stiffness out of the rear, so I turned it just that far. You can see how this dot right here is not lined up with that anymore. That was enough to make a noticeable difference. So you'll be amazed. You don't have to go crazy with the thing. A little at a time. It's good to have a Sharpie with you or something and mark it first before you start making the changes. So if you don't like it, you can always put it right back to where it was. I do have a long-winded suspension series videos. I'll put a link in the description to that. It's long and winded. It's one of my earlier videos when I didn't know to shorten things up, because most people's attention span is not that long. I need to update them at some point and kind of compress all that information. But it is broken up into segments, and you can find what you're looking for in that. And everything I have on suspension is pretty much in there. It's just long and winded. But if you're interested in it, check down in the description. I'll have a link to that. VW Sand Vets, or is that VWS and Vets? All right. Well, he's trying to think of a question to ask, and so his question is, would Beavis like for you to use some hair gel and style his hairdo? Huh. All right, let's go over here and find him. We're going to find out. Beavis! Hey, you want some hair gel? Do you? Maybe I'll help with that big old knot you got on the side of your head right now. Oh, man. Yeah, we took him to the vet for that. They really don't know what it is. They gave him some antibiotics. Never really went anywhere. But he's still kicking. He's got his girlfriend right there, Butthead. She is one big chick. Them two are in love. We got them both at the same time. And they're going on 4 years old. Going on 5 years, actually. Okay, I'll leave you here with your women. He doesn't like it when I creep up on him like that. Double MC. It's a 25 WR450F. Slowly riding through what ended up being deep rain water at the beach. The shroud on the WR basically funneled water into the intake. Bike died. I was pushing it out of the flood area, accidentally hit the start button. It cranked for a split second, then it seized again. I got all the water out, drained the oil, cycled new oil and filter in and out 5 times. Question, the bike runs fine, but I'm still concerned something is bent. Is there an easy way to find out? Do I need to pull the head? Well, when water enters the engine on a 4-stroke motor, I find 3 things happen. One is you get it out and everything's fine. The second is sometimes it seems to seize the piston ring, the compression ring, right onto the piston pretty much instantly, and it'll lose compression and not run anymore. And the third thing I can sometimes find is a bent rod. I've seen it where it didn't seize the piston ring, but it only bent the rod, and I've seen where it seized the piston ring, but it didn't bend the rod. Of course, the first option where it didn't hurt anything, and hopefully that's your case, is obviously what you hope for, right? But the bent rod part, that's the part that you really, if it's a mild bend, you might not know right away. And I hope that's not your case. It's hard to say if I would rip the bike open and check the rod. I would say if you're just using it like a trail bike type thing, you're not going for big jumps. You're not using it on a motocross track where if it locked up the back wheel mid-air, it could be pretty disastrous. If you're not using it like that, you're using it just, like you said, cruising the beach or whatever, and the motor sounds good and it runs good, I would say just keep running it for now. If it bent the rod slightly, the worst case is it's going to wear out the piston prematurely and the cylinder prematurely, and you'll know down the road, it'll start dropping compression or whatever. But if it's a track bike, if you take that bike to the track every so often, or you do huck-a-buck some big jumps, just for safety reasons, I would probably remove the cylinder head, remove the cylinder, and check the rod, make sure it's not bent. And it can be a very mild bend, so the best way to check it is to, after you pull that off, put the wrist pin back on the crank and spin the motor until the wrist pin on the rod almost gets down to the crank, and then compare it and see if the wrist pin is parallel to the 2 halves of the crank. If it's a little cockeyed one way or another, probably got a bent. You do have a bent rod, and you're gonna have to replace a crank. I hope that's not your situation, and usually if it seized up just by hitting the starter button, I mean, you might be okay, but yeah, that's kind of where I'm at on that. Drew Wallace, what are the main essential tools to have in the shop to fully rebuild a 2-stroke or 4-stroke engine? Well, besides all the standard stuff that you would need, you know, just your standard hand tools, besides all that junk, I have a case splitter, and I hardly ever use it, because if you watch any of my videos where I split the motors, I just use some long bolts, put them in, and and it splits the cases. So if you catch any of my videos where I do full motor rebuild, look at how I split the cases, and you'll see most likely you don't need a case splitter. Although I always have one in the shop, because every so often you run into something that's really stubborn, and I find I might need it. But you're definitely going to want some torque wrenches, or at least one good 1/2-inch torque wrench. Let me think. So you definitely going to want a torch of some type to heat things up, and maybe a grill or a stove to heat up the cases when it's time to put the bearings in, and a freezer to freeze the bearings. You know, again, watch any of my videos where I do a full motor rebuild, and you'll see all the tips and tricks that I kind of do that I use to get these done. Snap ring pliers, an impact if you don't have a pneumatic one, at least have an electric one to get the flywheel nut off and the crank nut off. That way, I mean, you can use aluminum and shove it in between the main gear and the clutch gear to lock the motor in place. You can do that. But it's just nice to have an impact around when you're doing jobs like that. Magnets, you're going to need magnets to catch little parts and stuff like that. Have some small little magnets. Depending on what kind of motor you're working on, you're going to want some Allen keys that go on a socket. And where the torque stuff, you're going to need some of these. You know, on your 4-strokes that hold the crank bearing in, they have the little holders that hold it in, and they usually take a Torx. Impact screwdriver, so when you run into the Phillips on it, you can hit and get them to come loose. And lastly, flywheel pullers. Whatever flywheel puller you need for your specific bike, you're going to need one of them if you're rebuilding a 2-stroke or a 4-stroke. Sangler Motocross, or is it Singular Motocross? Hey, what's going on, man? He's asking, hi, on a YZ250, what are the best settings regarding the height of the fork tubes at the level of the fork T for sand, for dirt, for terrain with stones? Thank you. Well, I'm going to say everybody is a little bit different, and but I'm running a 110/90/19 rear wheel, and with that rear wheel, I'm currently running a 5mm fork height, and that's measuring from the top of the triple clamp to the top of the actual tube of the fork. Not all the way up here, but just a tube. Like, let me see if I can get this camera to focus in better. See, it's set at 5.01, but basically 5mm. You see where I'm measuring right there? That's what I'm currently at on this bike, and it seems to be doing good. A while back, I was running a 120/80/19 rear tire, and with the 120/80, because it's a lower profile tire, I was running 7mm on the forks. But with the 110/90/18 that these bikes call for, and they come with stock, I'm finding 5mm to be a perfect middle ground. Now, I can't say much for the stones. I don't ride much stony stuff, but I definitely ride a lot of dirt and a lot of sand, and 5mm seems to be real good. I have seen people they run them like flush, and in my opinion, the YZ250 2-stroke corners like crap when it's flush. It's just stubborn as a mule when it's flush. I find 5mm be a good compromise between stability and corner proudness, and so that's what I use on the YZ250. Alexander Brooks, old timer here. I live over in the St. Pete Clearwater area, looking for a shop that you would trust doing a bore job for a 1982 Yamaha YT175. Can go anywhere in the Bay Area or even ship if needed. A nice bonus would be if they could also clean up the factory port casting imperfections. Here's who I use right here, Suncoast Cranks and Boring. There's their phone number right there. I find them to be very reasonable. Their pricing, it's about $100 to bore it out, hone it, clean it up. It's great customer service. They're willing to go the extra mile for you. Now, I haven't used them in about a year, so hopefully they're still in business. But I was using someone else, I forgot their name, in Starkey, Florida, and their rates just started going through the roof. It started reaching like $250 for it to bore one and clean up one cylinder. It was just crazy. But they do cranks. Suncoast does cranks, boring, excellent service, great guys, and it's in Largo, so that's close to you. I would check them out. If you do reach out to them, you find out they're still in business, let me know. I haven't used them in a while because I don't get many cast iron borers come to the shop. Most stuff nickel plated nowadays, but when I do, I need someone that's good. So far they've been good. Ruffig, tell me what you think about steel valves on older bikes. I'm talking about amateur riding. I had the steel kibble white valves and springs in my 2005 CRF 250R. I did over 100 hours in them without any adjustment. Before that, I rode the original valves, and the intake valve wore out very quickly, especially the right side. But I was never a fast rider and didn't care about the power that much. So that's why I choose this solution. Cheers, and thanks for all the videos you upload. Appreciate it. The key to keeping the titanium valves alive, or any valve for that matter, but keeping alive, is keeping dirt out. Keep your filter clean, make sure there's no air gaps where dirt can get around the filter, that kind of stuff. And it doesn't take much dirt to erode the hard coating on these titanium valves. Once it removes that coating, they just start sinking into the head, and they turn into trash quick. The reason a lot of people say stainless steel valves last longer is because they do kind of handle dirt a little bit better. You don't have that coating to worry about. So if you get a little bit of dirt in there, you get a little bit of wear on the valve, but then you don't get any dirt in there anymore. The wear that was done, and they'll pretty much stay right there at that point. The disadvantage of the stainless steel valves is they are heavier, so they do require a stronger valve spring, and that will put more stress on your timing chain, your cam chain. Your timing chain, your camshaft, your valve buckets. It puts more wear on all kinds of stuff. Also, stainless steel is more likely to break than bend. So if something did go wrong, it can cause more damage overall. Like, let's say the piston started bumping, like this one did. You can see where this valve started bumping the piston right here. If that was a stainless steel, it probably would have broke and caused more damage than what it did. And there's a piston that it was smashing into right there. But because it's titanium, they can flex a little bit and not snap. Where the stainless steel, any flexing, they just snap. So that's the downside for stainless steel. I'm going to suggest running the titanium valves, the stock valves, and just make sure you keep your filter clean. 100 hours is no problem for a titanium valve. 200 hours, no problem for a titanium valve, and you will not have to make any adjustments if you keep the filter clean. You don't let dirt get in there. Now, the reason it was your right side going out and not so much your left is because on that bike, the carburetor goes into the cylinder a little bit like this. Like, let's say the bike's pointed this way. The carburetor's at an angle going like this right into the cylinder, and the dirt seems to just stay on that path because it's heavier than the air, and it hits the right side valve more than the left side valve, and that's why it was your right side valve and it was dirt that was causing that. But if you so that's my suggestion. Is also another thing too is I've seen the aftermarket kibble white stuff. I've seen a lot of catastrophic failures on them with like the valve spring retainer just splitting, cracking, and just weird stuff like that. I can't say they're really that reliable. They're definitely not more reliable than the OEM stuff. Just keep the dirt out of them. Also on the YZ250Fs, the 2019 to 2022, I think it was, where you kept hearing about the timing chain issues. You might have heard about the timing chain issues. They have a weak timing chain, and the Yamaha upgraded the timing chain for the newer model. I believe it was the 2023 model. They put a more robust timing chain in it, or was it 24? I don't remember. It was the newer model that just recently came out. And the real issue with that was the people that were going to stainless steel valves and heavier valve springs. It was putting too much of a load on that smaller timing chain. So that's why they upgraded the timing chain to a bigger timing chain. But if you stuck with the titanium valves and the springs for the titanium valves, that stock timing chain would never cause you a problem. So that's just my opinion. Do with that as you may, but I would stick with the OEM titanium valves. I think you'll get a smoother, better performance, and it's gonna save a little bit of wear and tear on the timing chain, camshafts, rocker arms, valve buckets, that kind of stuff. Nick Saylor, would a cooling fan help the hot running problem? Well, I would say if you have a hot running problem, you first want to make sure that your cooling system's working good. What I like to do is start the bike up. You know, if it's not my bike and I'm just wondering if this cooling system's working good, is the water pump flowing good, is there any blockages or anything, I start the bike up, and as I'm warming up, I just keep my hand on the top of the radiator right here. I want to feel it start getting warm as the motor's warming up, meaning that it's transferring its heat to the radiators. If yours is, and everything's good with your coolant system, you're just running hot because let's say you're cruising too slow in the trails, or you're coming to a dead stop and letting the bike idle too long. Yes, a cooling fan does help, and the people that do like the woods racing or the GNCC type racing, hare scrambles, when they get stuck in them really tight trails where they're stuck in like first gear going over logs and that kind of stuff, then yeah, getting one of the cooling fan kits is going to be what you need at that point. It'll be this. It's going to be what you need at that point. Keep in mind when you put them on, you will be adding weight to the bike. It's more things that can break down, more complex. And while the fan is running, well, it needs to use electrical power to run, so it will also rob just a tiny little bit of horsepower. But it does the trick, though. If you have a bike that's overheating because you're riding it too slow and it's not getting enough ram air to the radiator, it definitely does the trick. JERMZ, RMZ. Be cool to hear your thoughts about the Kawasaki's future two-stroke teaser KX 125, 250, 500, KDX 250, 200, 300. Interesting times coming. Yeah, for sure. Might even light up a fire in Yamaha for some updates, and even a new dedicated YZ build for a 300 hard enduro to compete with the European manufacturers. Yeah, I'm really interested in this Kawasaki two-stroke that's coming out too. I hope it's not like a joke, like they're going to give us like some trail 300, you know, and because you know they're putting these commercials during a motocross race when us motocrossers are watching it, and we're hoping for like a full-on race bike. I hope they don't just give us a KDX 300. Here's your two-stroke. I mean, no offense to the KDX guys, you know, but I like my race bikes, you know, and I hope they give us a full-on motocross bike. I really think they need the 125 because of the schoolboy class. 125s have gained a lot of popularity lately, and I think people are realizing that the young kids need that 125 time to dial in their skills and hone in their skills, and the 125 class is definitely blown up. And all you have is a KTM and a Yamaha out there, so it'd be nice to get Kawasaki out there in the mix. I personally, for my own personal enjoyment, I'm hoping they bring back the full-fledged KX250. I loved my 06 KX250. Had an awesome motor, bulletproof transmission. The motor was bulletproof. The frame, well, I cracked two of them. The frame wasn't the best. You know, steel frames, that's what they do. If you run them a long time, they're going to crack at some point. So if they bring it back, I'm hoping for aluminum frame, KX250. If they bring a 300, let it be a motocross version of 300. At least for me, I like the motocross versions, bikes myself. But I'm really hoping they do it. I'm really, and I hope it's not like, excuse my language, I hope it's not a half-ass effort. You know, I hope they actually truly try to give us a good bike. And be honest with you, I know it's going to sell. It's going to sell good. People like two-strokes, you know. Yeah, 10 years ago, let me think. Yeah, 10 years ago, you show up to the track, you might hear one full-size two-stroke going around the track. And if you looked, it was probably me. But since then, you go to any track day, practice day, and you look around, and I'm going to say 35 to 40% of the bikes going around the track now are two-strokes. It's awesome. They have definitely made a resurgence. It's nice. I think a lot of manufacturers are missing out on that. Suzuki, Honda, and Kawasaki. And they're missing out on a lot of money. They really need to get back to making two-strokes. Multi-trash. May I use cheap Chinese AliExpress jets instead of the expensive original jets for tuning my SX125? Are those Chinese true to size? I don't trust them, honestly. I don't. Now, I have to admit, this is my little jet kit I take with me to the track. You know, most of these are Mikuni, authentic Kian jets, but there are some Chinese jets sprinkled in there here and there. For tuning reasons, I don't have a problem so much using a Chinese jet, especially if I have a bike that's not running right. And I'm like, man, this bike's not running right. It needs to go way leaner. And I don't have any jets going, well, we got some Chinese jets. Okay, let's just try it. Let's see what it does. You know, to figure things out, I don't mind using them. But once I find a long-term solution, I like to put an authentic jet in there. Because with the authentic Mikuni jet or a Kian jet, if, like this is a 178 right here, if I decided to go up to a 180, as long as it's a authentic Kian jet and I go up to a 180, I know I truly went up from a 178 to 180. That one tiny little bit richer. But with the Chinese one, you never know. It might be the same one. I mean, come on, you know the Chinese stuff. It could be the same jet. They're just putting a different number on it, knowing you might not notice the difference. I don't know. I just don't trust it. So that's where I'm at on the jets. Yamaha power at the 39-minute 55-second mark. Is it okay to tap out the crank if I'm going to reuse the crank? Does it knock it out of true? Alright, let's go take a look at that video real quick. Alright, it's my own video here. You'll see I'm putting a nut right here on the crank, and I'm going to bottom it out all the way down on the bottom. That way I don't bend the threaded shaft part. And take a socket and just knock it out. And the crank will come out. In my experience, I haven't knocked a crank out of true by knocking them out like this. You gotta understand, it's pretty difficult to true a crank. If you ever tried truing a crank, boy, you really gotta hit them hard. Especially these bigger, the 252 stroke and the 450 cranks. They're pretty robust. It takes a lot to get them out, or I mean to get them out of true. Right, so when we're hitting one side, like in the video, I was hitting right here with the nut on here, bottoming out. We're only hitting this side. This side's just along for the ride at that point. So, again, it takes a lot to knock these out of true. So we're just knocking it out. As long as you can hit it and it starts moving, you're okay. Now, if it doesn't budge at all and you're hitting it with the normal size hammer and it's just not budging, then try using some heat. Stick that side of the motor in the oven at 170 degrees or whatever for a little while. 170 degrees is not going to melt any of the seals or anything like that. Just put it on a cooking sheet or whatever and get some heat in it, and then try again. That usually will loosen them up and you'll be able to knock it out with a hammer. If you still can't knock it out, then you might have to break out the press, but in most cases I can get them out with a hammer and it's not going to knock them out true. What I have found that knocks the true out is when you go to split the cases, when people use screwdrivers or they start splitting them unevenly. Like you have the cases splitting like this and they're only working on one side and starting to split it unevenly, or the back side, instead of just cracking it like this and slowly splitting the cases. You want to try to split them as evenly as humanly possible, and you don't want to just work on one end and start V'ing it out like that, because I have seen that actually knock them out of true. Because at that point you're literally like tugging on it and there's leverage and it can knock it out of true. Now, it's not too hard to make a truing stand, and I have one up here and you've seen my videos. Matter of fact, I'll put a link in the description to my true story on truing a crank if you're interested in watching that. But a truing stand is not hard. You can makeshift one at home. Yeah, here's my truing stand with my digital dial indicator. Piece of wood here. Yeah. So they're not too hard to make at home. Honestly, you can makeshift one at home pretty quickly. I even use these steel slabs right here one time and stood them up and set a crank on there and was able to check the true. So it's really not hard to do if you're curious. And another thing you can do if you're really concerned and wondering is, after you put the motor back together with that crank that you're using and you put the cases back together with some good crank bearings and stuff and everything's good, before you put the piston on, grab the rod here and spin it. And as you're spinning it, take a look down here at the far end where the flywheel goes on. You can even take you can even take a pick and stick it in there, because it'll just fall right in the middle there. And as you're spinning the crank, just see it. When a crank is out of true, I usually can see it right here wobbling about just a little bit like that. There'll be a little bit of wobble to it as I'm spinning the motor. When the crank's true, you're not going to get any wobble. You're going to spin it and that thing's just going to stay just like that. Like I said, I've seen cranks that were just even a little out of true. If they're out of factory spec, or what they consider the factory tolerance, You will usually see it right here when you spin the crank. So when you go to put your motor back together, if you're really concerned that you might have knocked it off true, just give it a quick check like that. You can even go as far as using a dial indicator after you put the motor together. You can actually use the motor as your truing stand and set up a dial indicator, have a metal plate or whatever, or use a clamp style and hook up, set it right here, and spin the motor. Don't rock the whole motor around, just gently spin the motor, and you'll be able to tell if it's out of true or not. And yes, that will let you know, because trust me, if one side is out of true, it's going to show on both sides. So if this half right here is a little bit out, it's going to show on no matter what side you put a dial indicator on. So if it's out of true in any way, you're going to see it with only access to one side, or only checking one side. You're going to see it, don't worry. Zachary, yes, we're still trying to figure out if this world's flat or round. He's pretty convinced that it is round based on some Antarctic stuff and video. I still don't know, but it's an interesting conversation for sure. CBH, how tall are you? I'm 5'9" now. I used to be 5'10", but I think motocross, all the hard hits, all the big jumps has compressed me a little bit, so now I'm 5'9". My favorite food? Oh man, pizza, chicken strips. I'm not. The average American diet, sadly enough. Oh, I can't forget to add boiled peanuts. Yeah, boiled peanuts are delicious. Alright, so you have two questions. One is about the upper chain roller on a 05 YZ250, which is loose and floppy threaded insert in the subframe. I've never had to repair one of these before. That could be tough. I think what I would try, if I had to, depending on how loose it is I would knock it back out and maybe put a piece of safety wire or two pieces of safety wire in there, and then try to pull this back in with a nut on the other side and a washer over here, and tighten it up until it snugs that back in, and see if the safety wire takes up the extra little bit of room and space it has to tighten it up. If that doesn't work, it may be worth swinging it by a machine shop that also welds aluminum, and they can weld this up in here and then drill it out to the proper size and put that back in for you. And there's other ways you can probably get creative and do it, but I think I would start with the safety wire idea first. Now keep in mind, these YZs, that the upper chain roller, it doesn't really hit it much. It's not like some bikes that use the upper chain roller to help increase the rear suspension's tension when you're on the throttle, right? So when you're on the throttle, the motor pulls the chain tight up here up top. And on some bikes, you'll notice they have a very robust chain roller up here, and it's down lower. And that's designed so as the rear end's compressing, the chain will eventually hit that roller. And if you're on the throttle, it'll hit the chain that's being pulled tight, and that's going to all of a sudden stiffen up the rear end right before it bottoms out, right before it gets pretty low, so that when you're on the gas real hard, it kind of will help keep you from bottoming out, like when you land in a big G out while you're on the throttle, that kind of stuff. But these YZs, the two-strokes, they don't have that. They don't do that. This chain roller up here is really just to protect the airbox, and that's all it's for. And that's why they're so dinky, made out of foam, with no bearing in it, and you hardly ever see any wear on them, because that's all they're really doing is just, when the chain does kind of slap up here, it's just protecting the airbox. And the next question is about the up and down play on the YZ250 shifter 2015. He says his buddies has no slop up and down, and another bike has more, and then his 2005 has none. What causes that? Well, you mentioned that the shifter's tight on the shaft, and that's good. This one has no up and down play. Let's see how my wife's feel over here on the 125. A tiny little bit. Oh crap, I'm looking around the shop to see if I have an open motor that I can use as an example. I don't have any open right now. But where I would start with that is replace the whole shift shaft. You have to remove this clutch cover here, remove the clutch, and slide the shift shaft out. And then there'll be a little rod or pin that sticks out that the spring for the shift shaft goes over. and usually you can unbolt that out of the motor. They can get worn down after a while and cause a little bit of extra play. Also, the spring itself can get worn down after a while, cause a little bit of extra play. So you're just going to want to inspect that area. You're going to want to pull this clutch cover off, slide the shift shaft out, look it over, see if there's any wear on any of the parts, and on that I don't even know what you call it, that pin, I guess you can call it, that bolts in there, that the spring for the shift shaft. That spring is the spring that you feel when right there. That's the spring that we're pressing against right there. You're going to want to inspect that stuff, and anything that has wear, replace it, and that should tighten it right back up for you. Punk's motor. This is not a question that he's asking for me to use in this video, but I think it's one that should be addressed in this video. We might as well, right? He has an issue where his bike's starting up and it runs, but when he gets in the throttle, it just bogs, and it did it out of nowhere. It's a KX250F. I'm sorry, it's a KX450F 2017. Us two-stroke riders know if our bike starts bogging, breaking up, or anything like that, the first thing we always try, or if it doesn't start, first thing we always try is a spark plug. But in this four-stroke world, for some reason, the general population believes that the spark plug on a four-stroke, as long as it looks clean, well, this one looks good enough. As long as it looks clean, it's got to be good. But that's not the case, and that has made me look like a genius multiple times. Here's the thing with the four strokes, right? And you guys that watch a lot of my videos probably know I mentioned this a few times. You can pull a spark plug out of a four stroke, connect the spark plug wire to it, ground it to the frame, and see it spark, but that doesn't actually mean it's good. When it's inside the motor and it's in the combustion chamber, it takes more for it to fire and jump the gap there. It's under a load at that point, right? And these plugs can go bad. I don't know what causes them to go bad. I believe it's the porcelain in here just cracks, or it's an internal crack. And so when we check them externally on the bike by just grounding them to the frame with the spark plug wire hooked up, it's not under a load, so the electricity is going to take the path of least resistance, which is jumping that gap right here. But when we put it inside the motor and now it's having the fire under compression, well, now it's a lot harder to jump that gap, and it finds that it's easier just to jump through the cracked porcelain or wherever it's cracked in here, and the bike doesn't run, or it only runs under low cylinder pressure, like at idle or when you're just barely giving a throttle. But as soon as you really wick into it, now there's a lot for it to compress, and it finds the path of least resistance, which might be through the crack in the porcelain. This has made me look like a genius several times. Bikes that have been in the hands of some very good local mechanics that have a very good name, but couldn't figure out what was wrong with the bike, gave it back to the owner. The owner eventually just brought it to me, and first thing I tried is a spark plug. Called me, hey dude, it's a spark plug. What? That bike's only been there 10 minutes. How'd you figure that out? And this is the first thing I try, spark plug. Dealerships too. Dealerships, this has thrown them a curveball in these four strokes, and you know, the bike will start up and run, but you got to get in the throttle, or it doesn't run at all, or it just doesn't start at all. But they ground it on the frame, they see a spark. Well, it can't be the spark plug, can't be ignition, because we're seeing sparks, so that must not be it. Let's go ahead and check this and check that and check this. Always start with the spark plug. It can save you a lot of time and a lot of headache. 4-stroke, 2-stroke, it doesn't matter. It's cheap to test. Hey, if you throw a new spark plug in and it doesn't fix the problem, fine. Now you got 2 good spark plugs. You'll have a spare for later on down the road, right? So just always start with a new spark plug on a 4-stroke when you're having them type of issues. You know, if it still feels like it's got compression, it sounds the same and everything like that, it just doesn't want to start, or died out of nowhere, or it bogs when you get heavy in the throttle, throw a plug in it real quick. Offney, my friend Offney, he knows. One day we're at the track, his bike died out of nowhere. I said, dude, I bet it's your spark plug. I felt his kickstart, CRF 450 of the 2013, I believe it was. Felt like it had compression, sounded the same when you kicked it real fast. And we checked the spark plug on the frame, it produced spark. I was like, let's do the spark plug, man, real quick. Our friend Carlos, what's going on, Carlos? Looked over at us like we were crazy. I think he thought we were nuts. Replaced that spark plug, bike fired right up, and went on to live a good long life. Hey sir, 449. Hey mate, would love to see what to inspect on a cam chain tensioner. I have a suspect tensioner, but it seems okay. KX250F. Well, I don't have one for a KX250F right here. Well, I do, but I'd have to pull it out of a bike. I'm not going to do that. But I have one similar to it. It uses this style right here that has this little piece, a little ratchet type, and right. And then we have the Yamaha and the Honda style ones that you stick a tool in here and you turn it. These, I'm going to start with the Honda one first. I know your question is for the Kawasaki, but I'm going to start with the Honda Yamaha ones first. If these are suspect, the only thing you can really do with these is replace them. I have seen them where, you know, on the bench, hey, it's testing fine on the bench. Everything's good. Put it in the bike, you get, you know, a little bit of usage out of the bike, and out of nowhere it just jumps cam timing, right? We put the cam timing back in, check the cam tensioner, everything's good. Put it back in the bike, get a little bit of usage out of it, and it jumps cam timing again. Replace the cam chain tensioner, and it fixes the problem. So on these, if they're questionable, these type that you turn like this to adjust, you just replace them. That's what you do. On these right here, these can actually be visually inspected. And on the Kawasaki's, what I find is this little part right here gets worn out. It just gets sloppy, and you can usually tell because this part right here will naturally just want to sit out like that, or when you press it in, it'll want to go too far inward. It just gets sloppy. If you're not familiar with what a good one looks like and you question yours, and it might not be a bad idea just to buy a new one, but if you generally know what you're looking for, this is the area check right here. These things in the spring, right? That's another thing with the Kawasaki's. That little spring right there, that's the biggest issue I found with them, actually. Now that it's come to my mind, I'm glad I didn't miss that, is when they start getting sloppy right here, it'll look like the spring almost wants to jump out. You'll start seeing it climb towards this edge, this outer edge right there. If you see that spring start wanting to climb towards the outer edge, get rid of that tensioner and just replace it. I do not suggest the manual adjustment tensioners, the ones that you adjust manually. These kinds right here, this is a nice one. This Tokyo Mods cam chain tensioner. This is a nice one, but I don't suggest these because we have a tendency to not stay on top of them. They become loose over time, or we adjust it a little bit too tight and it puts premature wear on your timing chain guides and stuff, or we don't adjust them in time and they get a little bit clanky and clacky, and I find these cause more problems than what they solve. I just stick with the OEM ones that are automatic. They put the proper amount of tension that the manufacturer was looking to have on the timing chain, and they will automatically adjust to the next level when it's needed. So just stick with the OEM ones. And for the last question, this one I can't find it. I don't remember who was asking for it. I can't find it at all. Man, I'm sorry. But I remember the question. It was about the hour meter. How I put the hour meter on the radiator like this without it coming off using double-sided tape or whatever, and how do I route it. Here's what I use. Shoe goo. Yeah, shoe goo. You can buy this at Walmart. You can order online, Amazon, Walmart.com, eBay, but you can find it at Walmart where your shoestrings are at. That's where you're going to find it. This is great for dirt bikes. If you watch a lot of my videos, you'll know I use this stuff all the time for all kinds of stuff on a dirt bike. It's really awesome stuff. I use it to hold my hour meter on. You can see it right here. All I do is I put like a dab, just a little circle on the back side of the hour meter, and I press it onto the radiator, and then I use a zip tie or tape to hold it on overnight. Of course, I take my finger, I just any of it that stuck out the top after I stick it on, and just wipe it nice and smooth, and it will be there forever. It straps it on this radiator so tight that a lot of times, if you're not careful, if you just yank this thing off, if you want it to replace the radiator but retain your hour meter, you're probably going to rip the back of the hour meter off. Anytime I have to take them off a radiator and I don't want to lose the hour meter, I have to take my time with a razor and kind of just work my way down, or a flathead, and kind of slowly peel it off the radiator. But it really holds it on. And from there I route it. You can see the cable right here, or the wire for it. It just goes right down in here, and and connects. It goes right down in there, and just let me get the light up in there. There it is. There it is right there. And connects it right to the spark plug wire. Right here. Just above the coil. And that's pretty much it. I do the same to the wife's bike right here. You can see it's strapped in there. And look, that sucker's been there for 378 hours. And yes, this bike does have 378 hours on original crankshaft. Can you believe that? And it's been through a cylinder or two. She seems to wear them out. And I do the top end on time, but everything else on this bike is original, from the swing arm bearings to the steering bearings. I think I've done some wheel bearings on it, but for the most part, everything's original on it. Crankshaft and all that kind of stuff. I mean, she doesn't ride it too hard, as you know, but really solid bike. I'm going to answer this question in my man cave in the house. This is a spare bedroom. I just keep a bunch of parts and stuff as the parts come in, because my shop's kind of tight. Can't keep all that stuff in there. But anyway, Greg here is asking, what's your opinion on the Lectron carbs for the YZ250? They make some pretty bold claims, and people seem to either love them or hate them. Thanks. Okay, my opinion, I don't like the Lectron carburetor, especially for the YZ250. First off, the YZ250 has a power jet carburetor, right? And it has a throttle position sensor. That throttle position sensor is not only used to help control the power jet, but it's also used to help control the ignition timing. So when you disconnect the throttle position sensor and throw on an Lectron carburetor on there, well, now that the ECU or the CDI doesn't have the information that would normally be coming from the throttle position sensor, letting it know how much throttle you're giving it. So it's going to pretty much use a fixed timing advancement instead of having a timing advancement that can be scaled based on how much throttle you're giving it. So you remove that out of the equation. Another thing about the Lectron carburetor is they're kind of cheaply built, in my opinion. I've installed a few of them on people's bikes, and I removed a few of them on people's bikes. And the slide inside the carburetor, it's not chrome coated like the Keyhens and the Mikuni carburetors are. Here you go. Here's a slide to the Lectron carburetor. It's just like a steel heavy block or whatever. And it's not chrome coated like the Mikunis and the Keyens. It has a tendency to mainly wears out the body of the Lectron carburetor. And I'm talking about quickly. You can put just 10 hours on them, and you'll already start seeing wear on them. Let me see. Let me click on this picture right here. See, look at that. See that wear already forming on it? It doesn't take long with the Lectron carburetors. Another issue I have with them, well, I mean, look how dinky the spring is for the throttle slide. Another issue I have with them is they're just really not race proven. I know they'll probably tell you they are or whatever, but the Keyhen and the Mikuni, the OEM carburetors from Japan that have been used on our dirt bikes since the beginning of time, they have a lot of R&D in the racing circuits. And that kind of stuff's important to me, at least. The last thing I want is a throttle hanging up, getting stuck, just that kind of stuff. I understand they brag ease of adjustment and stuff like that, but I also seem to not be able to tune them in quite as finely as I can the Mikuni or the Keihin. They're also heavy, and if weight matters to you, as they say, if you laugh about the grams, you'll be crying about the pounds, or if you laugh about the ounces, you'll be crying about the pounds. So yeah, they're heavy carburetors. They're dinky. When I see a bike, it's a nice looking bike, and I walk up and I have and it has an Lectron carburetor on it. I was thinking good about the bike till I saw the carburetor. Now that's just my opinion. You can feel differently about it. I wouldn't waste my money on them. If you have worn out your carburetor and it's running rich and stupid like some of the Mikunis can do, just pay the $400 and get a brand new Mikuni, and you'll be good. Instead of paying the $700, $800 and get an Lectron carburetor that's just going to wear itself out. I wouldn't get one. I don't like the Lectrons, I'll be honest with you. Let's see. Let's look at this one right here. And I know this can happen to the chrome-plated Japanese ones too, but they take a long time. But look at the wear on this Lectron slide right here. It doesn't take long to start getting that type of wear, and then it starts wearing out. It wears out the the body of the carburetor and everything. And they'll sell you another slide. I don't know how much, but I heard they're not cheap, like 200 bucks or something like that. I don't know. It's just not my cup of tea. I do like the OEM carburetors myself. 38 model, you can add a throttle position sensor option for an additional $50, and that will at least, you know, retain the dynamic ignition timing that the CDI has with a throttle position sensor input, but you won't have a power jet because the Lectron doesn't have a power jet. Now I have a video on the power jet, digging through the power jet, how it works and what it does, and there'll be a link in the description to that video if you're interested in the power jet. Alright, Beavis, say bye to everybody. Hey, come on, don't attack me now. What are you doing? I'm not trying to steal your chick. I won't be riding this weekend. Going to Daytona to catch the race. Going to be out there on Saturday. Hope to see some of you guys out there, and hope you guys have a great weekend of riding. Thanks for watching this video, by the way. If you have any questions that I didn't answer on here, just shoot me a comment on this video or even one of my other videos. I'll do the best I can to answer it. Stick around. On Monday, I have a YZ250F 2025 coming to me to do a top end on, and a timing chain, check the valves, all that kind of stuff. It's a new model. I haven't had one of them in here yet to do a top end on it yet, so that's going to be cool and interesting. Stick around for that. Plus, we got turbo CRF 450 motor. It's down here in a hole down there to put a stroker kit on it, crank and all that. He's been sitting on it for a little while, so these boxes are a little bit rusty, dusty, look like rats been crawling through them, but it should still make for a pretty cool build. Oh, also, remember the question earlier about the impacts, where it is, the earthquake impact. If you check down in the description, if you have nothing to watch and you want to have a good laugh, if you check down in the description for the impact video review from Ab on these earthquakes, that guy is freaking hilarious. I promise you, you're gonna laugh through that video from the beginning. And he rips this thing open and goes all through it and compares it to other ones. The guy is hilarious. So check that out if you have nothing else to do. Hey guys, thanks for watching. Catch you in the next video.